Welcome to WarDocs 10 Good Minutes on Leadership series. In these episodes, we speak with leaders across the spectrum of military medicine to explore their thoughts, insights, and lessons learned on the unique privilege of leadership.
I'm your host, Major General Retired Sean Murphy, and today I'm interviewing a great friend, Paul Friedrichs. He is a retired Major General and just finished his job as the Deputy Assistant to the President and as the inaugural Director of the White House Office on Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy. In his role, Paul coordinated the U.S. government's efforts to enhance the United States' ability to prepare for and respond to pandemics and other biological events. Paul previously served as a special assistant to the president and senior director for global health security and biodefense at the White House National Security Council. Paul concluded a 37-year military career by serving as the Joint Staff Surgeon at the Pentagon, where he provided medical advice to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had multiple in-garrison and combat command tours and has continued to mentor rising medical leaders throughout his career. Paul, thanks for being on the show and sharing some of your thoughts on leadership.
Well, thank you, Sean, for doing this, and especially for inviting me. It is always a privilege to be able to give a little bit back and share some thoughts. And I hope at least there's one or two people besides our wives that will listen to this.
Totally agree. Most of us have a leadership philosophy. What foundational principles have shaped your approach to leadership and to that philosophy?
You know, it's interesting. You and I have had a lot of assignments in which we've worked together, and I think that one of the things that we have in common is we always bring it back to the patient. In healthcare, it's easy to get distracted by all sorts of platitudes and bumper stickers and groovy thoughts of the moment. But whether I'm on the Hill talking to folks in Congress or in a combat zone, if you keep the patient as the priority and keep the focus on delivering great care, it's really hard for a medical unit to lose their way. That's kind of the foundational principle that I've tried to bring to every organization that I've been a part of. And I've been fortunate to have great enlisted leaders with very similar philosophies that it is ultimately about what we do for those who trust us. Everything else derives from that. And, one of the things that kind of comes directly from that philosophy is the second part is always saying thank you. And I think those are probably the two most underused words in healthcare, if not in leadership in general. But we ask our military medics to do an incredible amount. We usually ask them to do it without full staffing, without all the resources they need, with a lot of confusion, like what's happening right now. And then we forget to say thank you when they knock it out of the park. And that's something that I really encourage everyone to adopt as part of their leadership philosophy, that it is not just about delivering great patient care. It's about recognizing that the team is delivering great patient care, thanking them for it. And then the follow on from that is creating the environment where they can do it even better the next day.
Thank you is something that's underutilized. And so many times we find ourselves in challenges in leadership. And can you think of a time or describe a time when you faced a significant challenge or a decision as a leader, and what made it kind of hard, and how did you navigate through it?
I think, for those of us who have deployed, it's easy to go back to that environment and think about particular moments. And some of us have very poignant moments. One that for me was almost exactly 20 years ago during Fallujah 2. We had our worst day at Balad, which was 73 casualties, combat casualties that came in 24 hours. And we had great teams. A guy named Don Jenkins from Wilford Hall was our trauma czar. We had great nurses. We had partners from Australia there with us. We had all the tools that we needed. We had well-trained docs and nurses and medics. And yet there was a patient that we did everything for, that I was the lead on, and he died. And so you have that moment where you've spent your whole life preparing to do this, and you fail. And your team knows that you failed, that we collectively failed. And then the choice is, Do you focus on that failure, or do you put that somewhere and rapidly pivot to the next patient and then the one after that and the one after that? And I think that's one of the, at least for me, was a very difficult thing to be able to do, because no one goes into medicine wanting to fail. I mean, we don't tell patients or their families that, there's a good chance in some of these circumstances we might not achieve what we set out to do. But it's important that we as leaders acknowledge the reality that healthcare is not a given. Getting it right every time is not a given. And there are times when, even when we do everything right, the outcome isn't what we hoped for, and certainly not what our patients hope for. And the mark of a great leader, I think, is the ability to say, okay, and now there's another patient, and then another one, and then another one that still is counting on us being ready to pivot and give them our best effort to provide the care that they need. I hope there are not a lot of people who have similar experiences, but it really does crystallize what a really bad day looks like compared to what many people describe as a bad day when they think about, oh, I've got all these emails to answer, or I've got a bunch of tasks to finish, or whatever. And I think for those of us who have had the privilege of serving in leadership, we have to help remind people what's a bad day, which is when we fail a patient, versus what's just the day-to-day toughness that's part and parcel of doing what we do in healthcare. And in that second category, we then have to help people remember what an incredible privilege it is that people actually trust us with their lives, or the lives of their children or their spouses or their parents. They trust that we'll do everything that we can, and we have to be able to look them in the eye regardless of the outcome and tell them that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, the leading is challenging in so many different ways, and sometimes you have to make unpopular decisions. What strategies have you used to build that strong team, and what challenges do you face in building that team so they can overcome so many things?
Just a couple of weekends ago, my dad celebrated his 98th birthday. And as we were
Congrats.
sitting around talking, he came back to something that I've heard him say now for 59 years, which is the great thing about telling the truth is it's easy to remember and it's true. And I think, we're often confronted with the, how do I tell this very depressed patient what's going on? How do I tell a team that's very stressed what's going on? And I've always found that the going in position should be tell the truth and then explain what we're doing about it, or what our options are, or where we have a decision, or I, as the leader, sometimes have a decision to be made, and the inputs that will help inform that decision. I think this really gets back to the prime directive for those of us who have the privilege to serve as leaders, which is our job is not to be the technical expert. I've done a lot of surgeries over the years. They don't need me as a two-star general to tell them how to do the surgery right. They're actually usually better at it than I am at this point. What they need me to do, or you or anybody else in a leadership position, is to create the environment where the person who's doing the surgery and the team that's supporting them have the tools that they need and know that we've got their back. If we can create that environment in which they can excel, 9 times out of 10, if not more often, our teams will knock it out of the park. I think the second part of that, and this gets back to the tough discussions part, is sometimes we have to acknowledge the reality, especially as we get into more senior roles, that the next dollar and the choice about where the next dollar goes is a really uncomfortable but really important decision. And lots of people have deep thoughts about we should do this or we should do that, we should write a policy memo. My experience has been, whether at the White House or working with you in PACAF or anywhere else, a policy memo without resources is just a good idea. If you really care about something, you've got to figure out how to get the resources that the teams executing the policy need in order to execute the policy and then publish it. Because putting it out without resources is not leadership. That's just sharing deep thoughts and hoping that somebody will figure out how to do your job for you.
Yeah, we have gone over many barriers in our career. But what's the most transformative experience that you've had as a leader, and how did it shape you or your leadership approach?
I think it's been a series of experiences, and I'll start with the one that I suspect will resonate with anyone who's watching this and who served in the military, and that's listening to the team that we're leading, and in particular to the enlisted leaders that are working with us. You may remember when I showed up to take command at Elmendorf the weekend before the change of command ceremony, the wing commander committed suicide. You can go to all the leadership courses that you want, you can read all the books on leadership, and they don't have a chapter anywhere in there that says, here's what you do if your soon to be boss kills himself the week before you take a job. And I was really fortunate that had a very, very outstanding senior enlisted leader, Chief Master Sergeant Mina, and had you and others that I could turn to. And that incredibly difficult experience was not easier, but it was more easily managed by having that team around me that could help me then step in front of a new team and say, this is tragic. I'm honored to be here. And we've got patients who are counting on us. Let's get after what we're here for while we grieve the loss of the then wing commander at the time. And I think that those sorts of really uncomfortable experiences, whether it's a plane that crashes right outside the hospital, which happened, or a volcano that erupts that shuts down patient care and shuts down all resupply for the hospital, which really happened, or the loss of power after we've spent millions of dollars on redundant systems that really happen. All of those things actually you have to kind of expect. And then you have to know that there are the unexpected things that happen. And then when they occur, they're less transformative and more of an opportunity for leaders to say, I don't have a great playbook for this, but I got a great team and I got a great network. How do I take what we know right now and how do we figure out how to do the best we can for those who are relying on us?
Yeah, I can remember those times, and we understand that military medicine often involves dynamic and evolving situations. How do you balance the need for adherence to standards or protocols with the necessary adaptability and innovation that the team and your leadership role sometimes needs?
So I'm incredibly fortunate that for 30 years now, my wife Rita, who is a former Army physician now working for the VA, started as an enlisted medic. She's a great sounding board and has never hesitated to give me candid feedback when I appear to be completely off the mark on things. And also fortunate that from a balance standpoint, have had a lot of friends and colleagues and some really extraordinary mentors who have helped along the way when facing these sorts of complex challenges and trying to find what balance looks like. I'll say the last 6 years have been tough in that regard. 4 years in the Joint Staff dealing with conflicts all over the world, the worst pandemic in 102 years, the friction between the White House and the Department of Defense, resulting in the Secretary of Defense being fired, and then moving to the White House in an intensely political environment in which almost any discussion about healthcare quickly becomes politicized. And I'll go back to the very first comment that I made with you today, Sean, and that's I just always bring it back to the patients, whether it's the patients that we're taking care of today, the patients that people think we should be prepared to take care of tomorrow. Every mentor, every colleague, every family member that I've ever talked to at the end of the day says, yeah, but you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're here to take care of me when I'm sick. You're not here to write policy memos. You're not here to do whatever else it is that sometimes seems really important, but really isn't. It's how do we describe the so what for the next patient walking through the door tomorrow and the so what for the patients that will walk through the door in 5 years or 10 years. I was on the Hill on Friday talking to a number of folks in what can most charitably be described as a particularly dynamic moment here in Washington. And even there, when people try to throw in all sorts of curveballs, if I brought it back to, yeah, but I'm talking about these people who are expecting health care. No one said, oh, I don't care about them. There's no political leader that says, that's not my priority. That's how we can help inform what our line leaders understand about the healthcare system. That's how we inform what elected leaders understand is we have the courage, the integrity, and the commitment to our patients to always bring it back to why we're here, which is to take care of those who entrust us with their most intimate and sometimes life-threatening problems.
Excellent recommendations. Another recommendation I want to ask you about, if you could only have one book or autobiography on leadership principles or an influential leader, what book might that be and why?
So I brought a visual aid with me here.
Excellent.
Uh, this is a great book, and I can't remember if it was you or if it was Gar Graham who first turned me on to that, or one of the other many remarkable colleagues with whom I've served. But The Servant is a wonderful book that I strongly commend to anyone because it really does frame the discussion not about me, but about us, not about how does this benefit my personal life agenda, but what is this doing for our collective priorities as we go forward? I'll impose on your many years of friendship and throw a second one in, and it's called Coral and Brass. And it was written by a guy named Dutch Holland, who retired as the senior Marine in the Pacific at the end of World War II. But it's his autobiography and his description of the two most lethal enemies that he faced in his career. The Coral refers to the Japanese on the Coral Atolls that the Marines repeatedly fought with as they invaded island after island and successfully defeated the garrison that were defending those islands. The brass refers to the people in the Pentagon that he had to fight with to get the tools that he needed for his team to be able to win each of those conflicts. And at one point in the book, he says he's not sure which was the more lethal enemy or the more difficult enemy to face. And I think, for folks who are in leadership roles, that's another great book to read because it reminds you that sometimes the enemy is not who we think it is. There's many things out there that make our life more difficult. We owe our leaders great advice, and that book does an excellent job of laying out how to provide that advice, especially in a military context, and how difficult at times it can be. So when folks feel like, my God, no one's ever had it as hard as I have, read Coral and Brass, and you'll appreciate that you're not the first, nor are any of us the only ones who have struggled with how to inform line leadership or political leadership about what needs to happen so that we can take care of the people that are entrusted to us.
Amen to that. We have been speaking with Major General retired Paul Friedrichs on WarDocs series 10 or maybe 10 to 20 minutes on leadership. Paul, thanks again for being on the show and sharing your leadership wisdom and insights for our listeners. And thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you so much, Sean. It was a pleasure to be here with you, and edit away whatever you guys want to cut out.
You bet. Paul, it's been a pleasure. Listeners, you can find more about our guests on our website, wardocspodcast.com. And be sure to rate and review our podcast on your favorite platform and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.
Thank you for tuning in to WarDocs 10 Good Minutes on Leadership series. We hope you found today's insights valuable and inspiring. To stay connected with Team WarDocs, visit our website at wardocspodcast.com. Follow us on social media for updates, and subscribe to our WarDocs YouTube channel for more engaging content. Your support helps us continue to document the experiences and contributions of military medicine professionals as we honor the legacy and preserve the history of military medicine for the next generation.